broadcasting worldwide from a studio inside global headquarters of RP Enterprises in Kansas City.
Hey, gang! Ladies and gentlemen, Papa's home!
This is the Papa Ron Podcast.
File transfer in progress.
With Ronnie Phillips and Jillian Gregg.
Showtime.
You know, I got a notification from Spotify last week that it is the 1-year anniversary of the Papa Ron Podcast. Can't believe it. We're into episode 37, which means we weren't able to do an episode every single week. Of course, that was the objective and the goal, but I still think 37 episodes an entire season, I think that's okay, right?
It's pretty good, yeah.
It's a good start to the first year, so getting ready for a season 2 of the Papa Ron Podcast.
Crazy.
And Jillian and I got some big plans, don't we?
We do. Yeah. Is your mom coming on?
I haven't asked her yet.
I haven't asked mine either.
I know. I want to do it, but just...
I'm going to see her tomorrow. I'm going to see my mom tomorrow.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask her.
So excited about what the future holds and really super excited that after a year that we're still doing this, I'm super excited that Jillian has joined me to be a part of this. And if I'm just raw and authentic for a moment, super excited about where I'm at in my life on a mental level from where I was a year ago when I started this.
Yeah.
And of course, the objective was for me to get myself in a better place and challenge myself to be open with the opportunity to share my testimony. And my gosh, the response that we've gotten from so many people. And I don't want to exaggerate it to make it sound like there's thousands of people, but it's a pretty good little clip of people that have reached out to say that they enjoy the podcast and in some way, shape, or form, an episode or multiple episodes has resonated with them. So thank you, first and foremost, to everybody who takes the time to either watch on Spotify or YouTube or listen on any of the other popular podcast platforms. Papa Ron Podcast brought to you by Brown Piercy Cattle Company. They've been breeding registered Angus cattle for generations with one thought in mind: quality beef for consumers. Their goal is to deliver prime-graded beef directly to customers' homes more affordably than you can purchase them at the store. It's better beef conveniently delivered at a lower price in the grocery store. Find them online at brownpiercycattle.com, which reminds me, I need more hamburger from Brown Piercy Cattle. I have run out. And
we're about out too.
And the warmer temperatures are upon us, which means grilling hamburgers outside. And so really excited about today's guest. This guy is somewhat of a relative of mine through marriage. Yes, he's a very popular guy. Let me give you a little back history on today's guest on episode 37 of the Papa Ron Podcast.
You have bullet points?
I do.
Wow.
This man has wrote 11 books.
Okay.
Yeah, 11 books. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about, a few of those. He's been with the Independence Examiner for 40 years, been a host of the Sonic Locker Room radio show for 18 area high schools over the last 15 years. He was the very first print member honored by the Simone Award Committee, the first media member inducted into the Greater Kansas City Football Coaches Association Hall of Fame.
Wow.
He's covered every Kansas City Royals postgame, including the last four, all four of the World Series that they've been in. Did I say that right?
That's right.
Okay. And then he and his wife, Stacy, she's a wonderful woman, are members of the Church of Resurrection. I am honored to welcome to the Papa Ron Podcast, Uncle Bill Althaus. Yeah. Uncle Bill.
Well, only took 37 episodes to get me. I've been sending him notes, emails, messages. Come on, man. I mean, I got to visit with Papa Ron.
Bill, I was trying to get to the point where you were so desperate to get on this show that you were willing to pay us to get on here.
Hey, right here, buddy.
Hey, man, thank you so much for coming on, dude.
No, thanks for the invitation.
This is so cool.
What you mean to our family, what you mean to this community, the impact you have made, your honesty, your integrity is so special. And it's just such an honor to call you a friend.
That's cool.
Aww.
That's so sweet.
That is so nice.
Well, we're into this thing 4 minutes and I'm already crying. No, but really, it's so cool to have you here. Naturally, there's a lot of things that we want to cover. And your friend Bobby Kerr obviously had you on his podcast. I got a chance to listen to that. So if it's called the ABC podcast. I'll give Bobby a little plug. The Always Be Cool podcast, right? I think is
That's right.
So go check that out. Bill was on that. Great podcast. You had some amazing stories. So we'll probably revisit some of those stories. But one of the things that I wanted to do on this particular podcast was visit something that is incredibly personal to you, and only really if you're a part of the family would you know something about it. We're going to get in deeper to that later, but you have an incredible testimony, and I think it could resonate with people who might be listening, who have a loved one or even themselves could be going through a difficult time. So we'll touch on that in a little bit. So you've always been into sports. I mean, based on your brother Rick and what he's told me, the minute you come out, you were all about, getting autographs and chasing down celebrities and following the game. And so
A lot of fun.
what's your first memory of being hooked on a particular player or a sport and just being obsessed with following it?
Well, I was literally the kid who went to bed with the little transistor radio on his pillow, listening to the Kansas City A's.
Okay.
They were horrible. Every time they got a good player, the New York Yankees snatched him away.
So
Mr.
those
Roger Maris.
those things haven't
Raleigh
changed.
Sheldon, yeah, at any time I could make it out to Municipal Stadium there at 22nd in Brooklyn, I was there, and I did not have one athletic bone in my body.
Oh, man.
And when I went to high school, I discovered that they offered this course called journalism, and I'm like, well, you mean where you can write about sports and you can go to the Friday night football games free?
Yeah.
Right,
I'm
exactly.
in. Where do I
Exactly.
sign up?
Yes.
And had a teacher. Everybody should have that one mentor, that one teacher that changed their life. Mine was my high school journalism teacher, Ron Clemens. You took Introduction to Journalism as a junior. My senior year, I was the co-sports editor of the paper, and that paper won the Robert Kennedy Journalism Award as the best high school newspaper in the country.
Wow. That's cool.
Our editor and Mr. Clemens went to Washington, D.C., received the award from Ethel Kennedy, and I was hooked. I just was hooked. Went to Northwest Missouri State University and was the sports editor my freshman year, which was a bit daunting, but had a great time there. Also dabbled in broadcasting, broadcast basketball and football games.
Cool. For the Bearcats?
For the Bearcats.
Nice.
Way before
Before they became
what
the level that
they're
they are
doing
now.
now, man. I mean, this
Wouldn't that have
football-
been cool if they
Oh
were
my
at that
God.
level? My gosh,
Yeah.
they're on top of it. And they're each sport.
You know, the coolest thing about the basketball program, a young man named Isaiah Jackson, who I covered 4 years at William Chrisman High School, was part of two national championship teams his freshman and sophomore year. They didn't make it that far this year, but I still see Isaiah working at the gate, working in the press box at William Chrisman events, and the family that they have at William Chrisman, he said, is replicated with the family they have at Northwest Missouri State, and he's thrilled with making that decision. And boy, the sky's the limit for him.
That's super cool.
But I graduated the year of Woodward and Bernstein, so everybody in the world wanted to be a journalist because you could work with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, you know. And spent 2 years at KQTV in St. Joseph, Missouri.
Okay. What as a sports reporter there?
As a weekend sports anchor.
Okay.
Did politics 3 days during the week. And then in 1981, an opening came at the Kansas City Kansan, which is no longer around. I was there 2 years and then have been at the Examiner the past 40.
Wow. That's
And
incredible.
I love what I do. I mean, I'm 69. I have no plans in retiring. A good friend of mine, the baseball coach at Blue Springs High School, Tim McGilligan, and I kind of have a pact. His son is a freshman,
Okay.
baseball player, so we may go out together when Connor graduates.
Oh, so that
you
means
know we'll see what
You
happens.
said he's a freshman, right?
He's a freshman,
all
so
right,
4 more years.
All right.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You talked, and I'm just asking out of curiosity because I didn't know that you ever covered politics. What was that out of your wheelhouse a little bit?
It was, but
And what did that involve? Because politics back then looked a whole lot different than it does today.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We had a pretty controversial mayor named Gordon Weiser, and I did a lot of things with him. and I'm embarrassed, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but a guy that was skyrocketing in the political process. Everybody said he'd be president one day, and he got killed in a airplane crash with his family. And
From Missouri?
from Missouri,
Okay.
yeah, he was from little town Chillicothe.
Okay,
up
yeah, I know where
there.
that's at.
And hopefully I'll remember his
I'm going
name.
to Google it
Okay,
while you're
you go.
talking.
please
And if
do,
I find it, I'll let you know.
Did you enjoy that part of it? Or
Yeah, I
was it
did.
something that
you know, I enjoy competitive things, and boy, politics. That's,
for sure.
That's very competitive.
So when you were doing it, were you having to be kind of a neutral moderator to then bring someone on each side of the aisle and then would have kind of like a debate? Or
Well, and I hosted several debates.
Okay.
Hosted all the mayoral debates while I was there, and you see a different side of things. You see the public persona, and then you see the political persona, and oftentimes they don't mesh.
Right.
So
right.
It was very interesting.
Is it Jerry Litton?
Jerry Litton.
There
Jerry
you go.
Litton.
See, there's a reason why Jillian's on the show.
Thank
She's
you,
fast with the
Jillian.
research.
I became very good friends with his mother and father.
Okay.
And the community was devastated. They were devastated. I was 22, 23 at the time, maybe. And I had never been around anything that was that impactful. And he literally...
Like the death that was impactful?
The death was impactful. The impact that he had made in Northwest Missouri was impactful.
So he was a state representative.
State representative.
And he had just won the primary to
Yes.
be senator.
Yes.
For the Democratic Party.
Yes.
So he died. It says he died in a plane crash while heading to his victory party.
Yeah, with his family.
Even more impactful that it wasn't just a random day.
I mean,
he had just won the primary and was headed to his victory party.
I mean, he was going to be a senator for X number of years, and then the next Democratic presidential run, he was going to be the presidential candidate.
Run.
So
now I'm trying to go back to my American politics classes, but in the case like that where he then passed after was elected but hadn't been, I guess, sworn in, or
he was senator-elect, is what it says.
So who then does the guy who lost then take his spot, or how do they fill that seat?
Well, Joseph Teasdale was the senator, and I think he was the Democratic senator, and I think he continued maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Many years ago.
All right. Well, you got some amazing stories from the 40 years that you've got, right? 40 years total, I
40
guess.
Years. Well, 40
40
years at the Examiner, 46 years total.
Of covering sports. I mean, I just remember stories that you've told me, Rick has told me, stories I heard on Bobby's podcast. There's some remarkable stories there. I was going to ask you what was the first moment that you were like when you covered something and you kind of maybe got shell shocked or celebrity struck, like that first opportunity, you're like, wow, am I really doing this? What did that look like?
Walking into the Kansas City Royals locker room.
Okay.
All my ball cards were right there in front of me.
Wow.
And
when was it? Like, how far into your career was that?
The 1976, first year.
Okay.
So 1976, the Royals began a string of 3 consecutive division championships. They lost to the Yankees every year in the playoffs.
Yep.
1980, they went to their first World Series. George Brett wasn't George Brett in 76.
He was just
was
the
his
kid.
breakout year. And, I'm this kid from St. Joe. We're exactly the same age. He's 7 months older than I am. I'm walking in that locker room, and he and John Wathan, who was the godfather of my oldest son, Zach,
Oh, wow.
became very good friends. And, George, hey, how the hell St. Joe? I mean, my God, they know where I'm from and they know my name. I am the coolest person in the world.
Right.
Sure.
And it was amazing. It was just such a fun time.
Yeah.
That was when I worked at Channel 2,
Okay.
then went to the Kansan. And when I worked at the Kansan, did some travels with the Royals and went to every away game with the Chiefs. Did that for 6 years. And
Wow.
then we had Zach, and it just wasn't fun being away from my son.
Yeah.
Okay.
He and Stacy would always come pick me up at the airport. And one time he came and he played Little League softball at this complex in Independence, and they had these red hats, and I could see something scribbled on it, and it was "Miss you, my friend Bill." I never made another road trip after that.
Really? That's where you just hung it up.
Yeah.
And is that, what year would that have been?
That would have been 1988. Zach was 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that why you kind of stopped doing cover, or I guess you still covered professional, you just didn't travel is what you're saying.
Right, didn't
Gotcha.
travel.
Okay.
Still went to spring training with the Royals. I quit traveling with the Chiefs the next year. Early on, it just didn't hold my interest. Plus, I mean, folks, before Patrick Mahomes came, let me tell you about the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah.
I covered Frank Sire at quarterback.
Ooh.
Todd Blackledge.
Well, Bill Kenny was in there. He wasn't a terrible quarterback. He was a decent quarterback on a terrible team.
If he'd have had a line, oh my gosh, he and Carlos Carson could have been Steve Young and Jerry Rice. Bill Kenny could deal, but he was always on his back.
Yeah.
Those were some tough times. But Marty Schottenheimer came in.
Yeah.
Carl Peterson, who was a very divisive figure when it came to running the team, but was very successful. Just never won that big game.
Yeah.
And if there was any coach I was ever around, I really considered Marty a good friend. And boy, he deserved some kind of a championship because he worked so hard.
Yeah, he really did.
And things kind of got away from him there at the end. They had some real thugs in the locker room and different things like that. And boy, it was a tough way for him to end. And then he goes to San Diego and has that amazing season, loses in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah.
It just wasn't meant to be for Marty.
Right.
Can we go back to George Brett for a second?
Yes.
Okay, because I've heard, and I wouldn't even try to repeat some of the stories I've heard, but I have heard a handful of stories. People always like to share negative things, right?
Yes.
More than they would want to share positive things. So
Yes.
I'm not asking you to share anything negative. I would just like to believe, and I will continue to believe, I've never met George Brett, but love him to death. My kids all started out their ball playing as number 5.
Number 5.
Yeah. So I'm not saying people don't have bad days.
No.
Those bad days turn into negative stories that get passed on and passed on and passed on. And I get that. But overall, was he difficult? Did he have a dry sense of humor that it was misunderstood? Was he, what do you think?
Or was he one of those guys where you had to be in a circle, so he might have been cool with you, but you could see him be a real DB to
That's
other
possible
people?
too. Sure.
So what's your thoughts on that?
No, I'm glad you asked that because for 20 years, George was one of my best friends.
Wow.
I went to his wedding. He came to my wedding. I can't tell you how many times he invited my boys over to swim at his house. A great story related to George Brett. My youngest son, Sean, never spoke in class. He's in kindergarten. And I get a call from his teacher. And she goes, Bill, I have to ask you something. Were you and Sean at George Brett's house yesterday? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, we were. And she goes, well, I asked the kids a question. What's the largest man-made object on the planet that you can see from outer space? And Sean was the first one to raise his hand.
Oh, my.
Well, the answer is the Great Wall of China. So Sean raises his hand and says, George Brett's house. He actually got lost in there. I hear this voice, Dad. And George and I had to go find where he was.
Oh, my gosh.
George,
so
like
cute.
I say, he wasn't George Brett when I first started covering.
Sure.
So we grew up together.
Yeah.
We were friends long before he was the hottest thing in Kansas City until Patrick Mahomes came along.
Yeah.
He could be surly. He didn't like signing autographs. He did not like to be interrupted at meals or during conversations.
Okay.
But I saw him do some amazing things, not only with my kids, but he had a heart of gold when it came to kids. And I never saw him turn down a kid's request for an autograph, unless there were 10,000 of them.
Yeah.
And I saw some uncomfortable encounters with some adults and things like that. But George, I I haven't talked to George in a couple of years. We're just not in the same circle anymore.
Yeah.
But he's very special in my life.
Yeah.
And he treated Stacy with great respect. So did Leslie, his wife. Leslie is at a ball game. She has a large straw-type purse that's kind of under her seat and open. Sean goes running down to see her and kicks a 44-ounce beer into her purse. And I thought, well, that's the end of my relationship with George. So I go in the next day, and George didn't say anything. And I'm like, hey, I got the suspense is killing me. Did Leslie tell you about Sean knocking that beer into her purse? He goes, no. And I thought, how cool is that she didn't go? I said, that friend of yours, his kid knocked the beer.
Yeah, right.
I loved her for that.
Wow. I knew that you had a pretty good relationship with him, but I appreciate you being, honest with that, because like Jill had alluded to earlier, you do hear two different sides.
Oh, absolutely.
And unfortunately, you don't want to believe the negative, but then when you hear it a couple times, why do you think he was surly about that? Do you think it was just because people were trying to profit off of his signature?
Well, I don't know if it was so much that. It was just, he was it in Kansas City. I mean, there was nobody else. The Chiefs were god-awful.
Yeah.
We had Len Dawson, but, the kids knew Len Dawson as a broadcaster for Channel 9. Right. They didn't remember him winning Super Bowl IV. And he just was hounded. And I had lunch with him several times. I was out in public with him several times. And, man, there's some rude people out there. If you treated him with respect, he treated you with respect. If you didn't treat him with respect, it could get ugly.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I remember you telling me a story about Albert Pujols. You know who Albert Pujols is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes Jillian, I got to double back just to make sure that she knows who we're talking about. You know that he played baseball at Fort Osage, right? He actually lived here in Kansas City.
Okay.
And so you didn't know that part.
I don't know if I knew that. If I did, I forgot.
It's all right.
My brain, if I don't want to keep it up there, it just goes.
Well, Bill talking about how George had a relationship with his kids and his wife reminded me of the story that Bill had told me, I think over a holiday one time, about you guys having dinner with Albert Pujols.
Well, Fort Osage had just won their second state championship in baseball.
Okay.
We were in Columbia, Missouri. I took Sean to the game because he loved Albert and Chris Franca, who was Albert's best friend on the team. Now a very, very successful businessman in the Kansas City area. And
so this is still when Albert's in high school.
In high school, when he's a junior in high school. Sean comes over to me, and I'm doing an interview with the coach, and he goes, Dad, Albert and Chris want me to go on the bus with them to eat. And I'm like, okay. So I look over, and they both kind of had this cat that ate the canary grin, And I see Chris get in his seat, Sean get in the seat, and Albert, and they're all there. And so they had a steakhouse in Columbia where you cooked your own steak.
Okay.
It's no longer there, but they had this massive grill in there. So when I get there, all the Fort Osage kids, the administrators, the parents are all around this grill and, cooking an occasional steak and cooking a chicken breast here. So Albert sees me, he goes, hey, Dad. and they had a steak. It was like called the Big Daddy or the Big Monster. 32 ounces. Well, guess who was cooking that? Sean.
Oh my gosh.
And every time I see Albert, we talk about that. And those, and Sean went over, ate with that. Took him probably 3 hours to cook that thing.
Yeah.
I know they ate more of it than he did, but wow. I knew Albert was going to be special when I saw him in high school.
Yeah.
But I never dreamed he would be the premier player.
Superstar.
Had it not been for Barry Bonds and steroids, Albert could have won 9 MVP awards.
No doubt.
He finishes one of 3 players to hit 700 home runs.
So is he retired?
Yes,
he just retired
last
year.
Yes.
St. Louis, right?
Well, he
started there.
Started in St. Louis, went to the Angels, and then the Cardinals brought him back for 1 year so he could retire as a Cardinal.
That's what I thought.
And he and Molina and Wainwright, the catcher and pitcher, the stars of the team, all retired at the same time. Yeah. And I wasn't there, but I guess there wasn't a dry eye.
I bet there wasn't.
When that
I'm
happened.
sure, yeah. That's big.
But my wife and I are in a Bible study group, and we were having dinner with the people in our group on a Sunday night, and my phone is just exploding. And I'm like, this is either good or really, really bad.
Yeah.
So I look at it, and a friend of mine says, turn on 60 Minutes. Well, 60 Minutes did a piece on Albert Pujols. So the camera is shooting over he and his ex-wife Dee Dee's shoulders, and they're looking at a scrapbook. So I rewound and went to it. Every story was by me.
Oh my gosh!
Really?
And I thought
that's pretty
cool.
That
I mean,
really
I'll
cool.
never be on 60 Minutes, but my name is right there with Albert Pujols.
Your
So
work was.
that was a nice little deal.
That's
I was a
amazing.
little surprised to hear about him and her getting a divorce. I remember seeing a special on them when they were together or were dating. She had actually had a Down syndrome child from another relationship. And one of the things that she loved about him was how Albert, treated that child and gave it so much love and affection, and how difficult she thought it would be to find somebody that would accept her and their child, being that the child had Down syndrome. And here's Albert, who's a major league baseball player, and ended up loving that kid as if it was its own. I was a little surprised to hear about that. Do you still keep in contact with Albert?
No, not so much. I was surprised. One of my good friends, Phil Caldarella, who is a legendary trainer and baseball follower from Fort Osage, is very involved in Albert's charity for Down syndrome kids. Raises hundreds of thousands of dollars for Down syndrome. And, I've never asked Phil about it. And all I know is what I've read. I was surprised. But I know that his compassion for anyone with Down syndrome, especially children, still burns bright.
For sure. Yeah. And I think I saw tweets out there that it gets very amicable. There was nothing.
Oh, it was.
And I'm not trying to get anything juicy here. I was just, when you bringing up his name, reminded me of his, as you put it, passion for Down syndrome, and how cool I thought it was when I saw that story of him marrying someone who had a child with Down syndrome, being at the status that he was. Let me ask you, when you were, Jill and I worked in radio, and she was very, very blessed to where her first entry to radio was at Q104. Like, typically you kind of got to work yourself up the ranks, and you kind of alluded to starting in St. Joe, but you didn't really spend a lot of time before what I would call coming to the major leagues, to Kansas City. Was there a stepping stone process upon getting to Kansas City to where you were working your way up? I mean, I think you pretty much alluded to, once you got to the Examiner, you were already traveling with the Royals and stuff. Like, how does that opportunity, or is it just different in newspaper or print than it is in radio?
Well, I had the degree. You have to get that piece of paper. Back then you did.
Back then you did. Okay.
Worked in TV and would come down on weekends and do something, especially if it was in the afternoon or every Sunday game, since I had to anchor the news those nights. It was a process, and it was certainly a growing up process for me, because I had to learn how to go from being the craziest fan you'll ever see from my hometown teams to somebody who's following them and has to be very impartial.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit tough, but I certainly got the hang of it. And my gosh, we had an NBA team. We had an NHL team who are now gone.
I guess I didn't know that. Who was the NHL team?
The NHL team went to Colorado and became the Avalanche.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess
they were only here a couple of years, played at Kemper.
Okay.
It was the NCAA head was here. I mean, everything that involved with the NCAA, they would have their Big 8 coaching tournaments or news conferences, and Osborne and
Switzer.
Nebraska's coach.
Tom
Osborne.
That's Osborne.
And then
Barry
Switzer.
Switzer
from
Yep.
Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these guys would come. All the big time college coaches. I mean, my gosh, it was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great time to be involved, and I was in heaven. You know, I'm single. I'm going around doing things that I used to pay for. Yeah. Got to know some of these.
That's the biggest perk, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why I did it in high school. You know?
Right.
It was crazy, but it was just so much fun, and it's still fun. I mean, it's not fun being at a crappy high school soccer game when it's raining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But other than some moments like that, I've never worked a day in my life when it comes to my job. There are things outside of my job I'm not real happy about sometimes, but the actual job, meeting the kids, people ask me, how do you have so many friends who are like 30, 40 years younger than you are? Brian McCrae's one of my best friends. I covered him when he played football at Blue Springs High School.
Wow.
Skylar Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
The principal at Fort Osage High School took a picture of me interviewing Skylar after they won the first state championship in football at Fort Osage. And, I still have that photo. And Skylar was in town, and we got together a couple of weeks ago, and I showed him that photo. And he said, Coach Shart's always called me a skinny little geek. And looking at that picture, I was a skinny little geek. So
he really was
until
he got to K-State. And they
K-State.
fattened him up a little bit, or beefed him up, I should say,
Yes.
fattened him up.
Yeah.
No, you definitely have a ton of relationships with a lot of different people. I would be curious to know how hard it is to do your job, being that the landscape of media has changed so much from linear to digital.
Yes.
And you just see like newspapers that are going out of business, magazines that are going out of business.
Yeah.
And this is something you've done for 40 years. This is your craft. This is what you do. And you're towards the tail end of your career.
Sure.
You've talked about potentially retiring in 4 years. So if for whatever reason you were let go tomorrow, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But if somebody who had that passion, say, was in there coming out of college or whatever, just to kind of talk about how the landscape has changed and what has challenged you as somebody who's been kind of a traditional journalist.
Right. The Examiner comes out 5 days a week. There is talk that in the not too distant future, we may either go all digital or we might go 2 papers a week, but we would still have the content online
Digital,
that we would have in the papers.
Yeah.
But Ronnie, I'm 69. I like to pick up a newspaper, but I was just talking to a coach about this last night. I check the obituaries every day, and there goes a subscription. There goes a subscription.
Right.
True,
The people that subscribe to a paper are a dying breed, a bunch of dinosaurs.
What is that target audience, would you say?
Well, I would say
As far as the age group.
we did a poll in the paper, and the top 2 things by a landslide were our high school sports coverage and obituaries.
Yep.
And I think it's 40 plus, 50 plus that still get the paper, or it's the parents who have the star athletes.
So they can have the clippings for the scrapbook.
And we can look on an analytics site with our paper, and most of our stories, my stories, the sports stories, are read early in the morning, late in the afternoon. Well, they get it and read it before they go to work. They read it when they come home from work.
Okay.
So,
and is there a subscription for online as well?
Yes, there is. Yes.
And is it equal? Is it the same?
Oh, it's like $4 a month. Yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah.
cheap. So,
Okay.
We're hoping that folks will, be involved with that. I've had so many coaches, activities directors, and leaders in the community reach out to me, asking what they can do to get the word out and let people know about the Examiner. And there's no set plan. And as soon as there is, if there are major changes, I'll certainly let them know. But we have made such a great impact in the community. And it's going to be so sad for me if the Examiner would ever go away. And the young lady I was talking about earlier, Grace Slaughter, who's the standout player from Green Valley, who's going to Missouri. Her mom heard about this before the start of the basketball season, and she called me and she goes, "Please tell me you're going to have a paper through Grace's basketball season."
Yes.
Yeah.
Because a very, very good friend of mine is Aaron Ime, who was the former basketball coach at Raytown South High School, which is the most iconic high school in Missouri. Had a coach named Bud Lathrop who won over 600 games. And he called me and he goes, "Bill," he said, I just wish I could let people in eastern Jackson County know how important the Examiner is. They had been to state 3 straight years and had won a state championship, and he didn't have one article about it, didn't have anything kids could put in a scrapbook, no pictures, nothing. And they aren't in our coverage area. I am the Examiner sports staff. When I joined the paper 40 years ago, we had 30-some people on our staff, and we had 4 sports writers and 4 photographers.
Wow.
So it has
all you.
been reduced completely.
Okay, so let me ask then, did those people move on to something else, or did it finally become a time when subscriptions began to decline that they needed to trim fat, and because you had the tenure that they retained you? What did that look like?
A lot of them went on to, a couple of them went on to the Star. Most of them got out of journalism.
Okay. But nobody was really then fired because of, let's say, budget cuts or anything like that.
Not one person was fired. Okay. But they were let go of their job, and it was a lot of nervous nights.
Yeah.
Just
did you have any of those, or did you feel like you had nervous nights?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. Just wondering what was going on, but we're surviving. We're still the top newspaper in our category in the state. And, I'm proud of what we do. Small staff, but a very determined staff.
Sure.
Very talented staff.
What are some of the things? So, like, if anybody would be listening to this and they're in that 40 to 50 or 60 range, and they're that traditional newspaper subscriber who likes walking out on their driveway or onto the front porch and picking it up and coming in, sitting down at the breakfast table to read the news as they're getting ready to go, eat breakfast before work. At some point there's going to be a shift. I mean, we're seeing it, right? There is this shift to the digital space. What are some of the things that the Examiner is doing to combat, that transit, not really combat the transition, but maybe
enhance it.
Right. Exactly. So, because the problem is that if you don't adapt or you don't adjust, then you will be left in the dust. And so what you talked about, the online subscriptions, is there any other things that they're doing? Because at some point in time, if they can't get the newspaper, then the people who are listening to this podcast, and believe it or not, there are people over 40 and 50 and 60 that listen to this podcast. How would they be able to get content from the beyond just an online subscription?
Well, the Examiner has subscriptions. You can go examiner.net and get all the information for that. Our website's pretty good. A technology company bought us about over a year ago, and boy, we went through a roller coaster of emotions with that move, that purchase, and now things are really good. We have a solid website. You can go on there and find the stories. We had the most amazing freelance photographer, a guy named David Rainey, who was a dad who photographed his daughter playing soccer at Blue Springs South High School. He is now the Kansas City Currents photographer, the Kansas City Mavericks, Kansas City Comets. He works for several of the high schools, yet he still finds time at night for us. And he will take what we call a gallery. He'll get 10, 12, 15 pictures from an event, and when you go online, you can see all those pictures. And then if you want one of your son or daughter, you can contact David, and he'll work out a way to get you the photos. And he is constantly giving away photos to kids. I love his passion. He is, to me, is the photography equal of me. I mean, I love these kids. There are teams over the years that I honestly feel like I have sons and daughters on the teams because I've become so close to the kids. And now that I'm really old, I feel that way about some of the coaches. That
you probably got to the point now where you're covering some of those kids as kids.
Oh,
How many generations have you gotten into
3.
now? 3? Holy cow, you are old.
My
I'm
goodness.
at William Chrisman High School. Gentleman comes up to me and he goes, Bill, you did a story on me in 1982, which was my first year at the Examiner. And he said, you see that young man out there playing? It's my grandson.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my
Isaac
gosh.
Woodward from Fort Osage High School.
Wow.
And
how did that make you feel? I mean, that's kind of bittersweet.
It made me feel old.
Yeah.
But it was cool. I mean, for him,
because he didn't have to come up to you,
No.
right? And so he recognized you. He obviously held you in high
elderly
regard.
guy walked up the stairs to me.
Yeah.
And, it made me feel old, but I mean, it made me feel great.
Sure. It's bittersweet.
And, our player of the year in basketball 4 or 5 years ago, Claire Rose, played her last game. She was an amazing little point guard at Green Valley. Her dad came up to me at the last game. I'd never met him. He'd never sent me a text or an email. And he had the story that I had done on him when he was the Truman High School quarterback from 1982.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, it's amazing. And Claire said, I never thought to tell you. She said, that story's up in our house. Been up there 40 years.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, back then, 36 years.
Yeah.
But, when you walk into an activities director's office, when you maybe go and interview a student athlete at their home, and you see some of the pictures framed, like I see one right over there. I walked in, I saw that, Ronnie, it just made me feel great.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's a gift from your mom.
Oh, I know. I've got one that she did on a story they did on me when I was inducted in the Greater Kansas City Football Coach.
And I thought it was
framed just like that.
It was so cool that, and of course that we're talking about Grandma Bubbles. You might remember she passed away a few months ago. And so she obviously very, very proud of Bill and his work and the stories that he was able to tell. And if you were ever to go into her apartment or even prior to that into her home, the entire, you go into the typical grandma's house, right? And you think antiques and really nice paintings on the wall. This woman has got walls littered with sports memorabilia.
Hockey sticks.
Oh, she loved the Mavericks.
I've seen those
loved
pictures.
the Mavericks. And, a couple of weeks before she died, the Mavericks always gave her tickets for every Saturday night game. And they had a big get-together for the team. And the coach called me and he goes, I haven't met your mom. Is she coming? And I said, yeah. So he brought every player on the team over, personally introduced them. One guy who was good friends with me brought his helmet, had it signed by the whole team. And she
ate it up.
Lived for the Mavericks.
She did.
I mean, and, it would be like after a game, I might bring a player out and I said, Andrew Courtney, Sebastian Chanel, this is my mom. And I said, okay, now, Mom, they got to get, not Mom, I never called her Mom, Grandma Bubbles.
Right.
Bubbles, they've got to get back. No, they don't. She's holding on to their arm and they're looking at me like, what am I supposed to do?
You got to know Bubbles that she is a talker.
Yeah.
She loved to talk and she loved to tell stories. And we definitely had some great conversations about sports and politics and life. And she was, one of the things that we didn't get to do that she really wanted, she did actually once, I think it was for, I think it was a Chiefs playoff game. She had heard about the basement, the fan cave that I had built, and then she wanted to come over and watch a game. And so Rick had went and got her, and we were able to, because she wasn't good with stairs.
Sure.
And so we brought her around the side in the wheelchair, and she got to sit in the fan cave and watch the Chiefs game in the fan cave. But one of the things that I regret to this day that we weren't able to do is that she wanted to come to the premiere event or be able to sit down with me and watch one of our Heartland Waterfowl episodes.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And it didn't work out. But I was very honored that Bill got to come to the premiere a couple of years ago and cover the premiere. And then Bubbles was excited about the article that Bill had wrote about the show.
Nice.
And so she especially had that article matted and framed. And so it hangs proudly in my office. That's just kind of a choky moment there. and so much so that I've completely lost my train of thought of where I was. Oh, I know what I was going to ask. So how difficult is it when you've got all of these areas? Because how many different high schools are you covering?
Well, in the Sonic locker room, we have 18.
Right.
And what we do Monday morning, Tuesday morning from 7 to noon, we call each school. We have about 25 minutes for each. The programs are 15 minutes, and we do 9 shows Monday, 9 schools Tuesday. With the examiner, we cover Blue Springs South, Truman, Chrisman, and Van Horn, Fort Osage, and Green Valley.
How do you cover all of every Friday night football game?
Well, we have stringers that have helped, but
what is that, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, a stringer, like a high school student, a mailman, a businessman.
Like an intern, somebody kind of was interested in maybe getting in there, and so you just kind of...
and they don't want to be right. They just go and get the information and write up a little something on it. The coaches call our sports editor, give him information. But this is something that, Ronnie, has really, really changed. We used to have somebody at every high school game.
Yeah, that's the way it used to be.
We covered Lee Summit.
Oh, wow.
We covered Raytown. I lived at Raytown South High School during the basketball season because everything Bud Lathrop did was just so special.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. His 1990 undefeated state championship team, greatest high school basketball team I've ever covered.
Did that include, oh my gosh, why am I forgetting his name?
Javon Crudup?
No, sorry. I'm thinking he only played at Raytown then. Kid had played in Nebraska.
Oh, Teron Lou.
Thank you. Yeah, was he on
greatest high school player I've ever seen. Now but
that wasn't the same team?
way before Tyron.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That team had Javon Crudup, who went on and led Missouri to 2 Big 8 championships.
Okay.
And then had a kid named Chris Lindley, who they found out lived a double life.
Oh.
This kid was a straight A student, just the pillar of the community. And on Saturday nights, he and a group of guys would go down and jump on trains down by Kemper Arena.
Oh, I did think I heard about this.
He fell under a train, cut off his leg, and drug him over 100 yards.
Oh.
No skin on his body from his neck down, lost his leg. And KU had offered him a scholarship, and they gave him the scholarship. He went for a year, didn't play basketball. But Lindley was the guy on that team.
Oh, my gosh.
Well,
what year was that?
Pardon me?
What year was that?
1990.
90. So Brown's? No. Yeah. No, that would have been Roy Williams' first year.
Yeah, it was Roy Williams.
Or second year, because I think
he could.
In fact,
another little fun story. Williams is down recruiting Lindley, and Bud comes up to him afterwards talking. He says, Bill, come over here. He says, Coach Williams has a question for you. He says, hey, he said, I've heard about this Stevenson's restaurant, and I want to take my family there to eat. I said, Coach, I live a half a mile behind Stevenson's. So let him there, pulled up in the driveway or in the parking lot there on 40 Highway, and he rolled down the window and said, thanks a lot. If you ever need anything from KU, let me know. Last time I ever talked to him.
Oh,
but
that's really neat.
Javon just had that team crawl on his back. He's about 6'7", 6'8", monstrous. Only high school kid who ever intimidated me. I mean, this kid was big.
Wow.
And led him to an undefeated season. Pretty amazing.
Did you still cover any of the professional teams, or your passion is really into the high school game?
It's in I cover the Mavericks. I'm there every night.
Yeah.
Cover the Comets. You know, I'll go to half dozen Royals games a year and you know, pick and choose some Chiefs games. But
it seems like the business model maybe has changed for the Examiner because
we give our readers something they can't. The Star, I don't think, really doesn't have any high school coverage anymore. So if they want to find out about the local kids, they can pick up the Examiner. And you know, the Comets are just so much fun to watch with that indoor soccer. It's the only thing my wife will go to. She loves the Comets. She got a couple of things. So is she
excited about the Casey Curran then?
Oh, yeah. We're going to go, you know, and we have a local girl from Green Valley who just got drafted by them, Rylan Childers.
Oh, wow.
She had an amazing career at UMKC and then spent her last 2 years at KU.
Oh, nice.
So she's on there, so that's going to be fun.
That's awesome.
And this new arena they're building down by the river. I've driven by it a couple of times. It's phenomenal.
Is Matt working on that? Yeah, her husband's actually
My husband's
part of
one
that.
of the superintendents on the job for J.E. Dutton.
Oh, you're kidding.
Isn't that cool?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
I had heard today actually that they're going to get ready to do some massive renovations at the Independence Event Center or the Cable Dahmer Event Center because they're in I don't know if my source is correct on this. I was a little confused when he said it, but apparently they're wanting to make some sort of changes. I mean, they're changing out the seats, the digital billboards, and then the new sound system, and then something about the glass because there's the possibility of putting an NHL team or game in that arena. Have you heard anything? This is the first I heard of any of this.
I'm surprised if there's anything with the ribbon board or the huge scoreboards, digital scoreboards they have, because they just replaced all of those last year. But they had a huge controversy last year because they bring the St. Louis Blues in.
Yeah.
And the glass didn't meet the standards of the NHL.
Maybe that's what it is. Okay.
So I wouldn't be surprised. And plus, every season, if you're sitting down there, I mean, those pucks and guys' helmets and sticks hitting it, it's, you got like, okay, let me see if I can watch this game without some big gash across it.
Yeah, it's hard to watch through the glass.
It is.
Sure.
It really is. So that wouldn't surprise me. I tell you what, Jillian, you walk into that arena, and if anybody would tell you it's 15 years old, you wouldn't believe it.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
They have the upcake. They're always replacing seats. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful people working there. I live there. I should have a cot there.
Yeah, right.
Especially with the Mavericks and the Comets going on. And they're just so accommodating.
Yeah, they're
great. They greet you by name, and it's a wonderful environment. And boy, Independence, I never dreamed Independence would have something like that. It's great.
I'm curious, we had Nate Bucati on the podcast last week. And so we spent some time talking about soccer. And one of the things that we talked about was, for someone like myself, growing up in a small town in Northeast Kansas, soccer wasn't a sport that we'd played. It wasn't a sport that was really offered, maybe at a very minimal level, but like in high school, we didn't have a soccer team.
Sure.
We certainly didn't have a hockey team.
Yep.
It was the three major sports: football, basketball, baseball.
Yep.
Maybe you did track or played golf, but other than that, I mean, those were the three big sports. So, I know that you grew up in a small town as well in Missouri, and maybe because it was closer to the city, soccer was more prevalent then. I don't know, but what was your knowledge of the games, be it soccer or hockey, before they arrived to Kansas City? Because now you didn't know anything.
Zero.
So how did you educate yourself to where you could be informative and write about it? I mean, how did that challenge look?
I tell you what, nobody's ever asked me that question, and I'm so glad you did, because Scott Hillman, the coach of the Mavericks, their first year, they were in the Central Hockey League, which was basically a step above a beer league, where guys just they'd go from playing a hockey game to driving a UPS truck. I mean, it was guys that just wanted to play hockey. I knew nothing about hockey. My first game story, I had the third quarter in there. Well, they don't play quarters. They only play 3 periods. So periods and quarters, that was my first thing I needed to learn. And he walked me through everything. He had me come to practice. He had me ask questions of himself and of the players. Just phenomenal. He took my hand and walked me through that first season.
Wow.
And the first national award I ever won at the Examiner was called Hockey 101. And we took a picture of a player in his gear, and then a picture of him without the gear on, and then pointed the arrows to what they wore and how much. They were 25 pounds of gear,
I believe,
in a game.
Wow.
I loved him for that. Well, then when the Comets came, it was the same thing with them. Their PR director, who is now the PR director and works for the league with the Current, Jeff Husted. Anything you want to know, I'll bring the players and their goalie, a kid named Danny Waltman, who is one of my dearest friends. He's been in Seattle the past 6 years, but they play here every year, and we always get together, and he answered every question I had. And they had some wild rules when they started. I mean, they had a 2-point circle. They had a 3-point circle. Well, now it's more like the outdoor game, but it's just very high scoring. And you got a sheet of ice, got a sheet of plywood, and then you basically have got just the most minimal carpet over that. And I don't know how the guys do it. They get popped and go on the ground, go into the boards, and I mean they're right back up because they know if they're hurt, there's somebody right there ready to take their place.
Is the flopping as bad and is the flopping as bad in that sport as bad as it is in the is it as bad there as it is in the MLS?
It's horrible.
Is it really?
They now have though a rule where you can be put in the penalty box.
For flopping?
For flopping. A kid that played for the Kansas City Mavericks, Tyler Courier, this kid was just tough as nails. And I said, you want to go see an indoor soccer game? And he goes, yeah, sure. He left after one quarter. They do play quarters because of the flopping. He said he just couldn't handle it. And it used to really be bad, and they've really tried to clean that up. They have a whole new regime. A guy named Keith Tozier, who was huge in the initial stages of indoor soccer, is now the president of the league, and he hates that. It's embarrassing to him. So they're trying to clean that up, and the Comets do a great thing. Win or lose, after every game, they bring tables out, and the kids can come out and get autographs and photos.
That's fun.
And these kids love the kids love it, but the players love it. You know, and oftentimes I've talked to them after a tough loss, and they say, you know, the loss isn't quite that bad when a little kid comes up and says, man, I loved your goal, or this is the first game I've ever been to. So they do a great job with that.
That's cool.
Great.
Yeah, I'd like to check that out sometime. My little boy, Rhett, he's been walking around the house for the last, it was after the game we went with you to celebrate Bubbles, and we were in the suite, and that was Rhett's first, he's just turned 2. And that was his first hockey game. And so he literally every single day, no exaggeration, walks around and at least a couple times will say, ha game. He wants to go to the hockey game. So we ended up taking him to the hockey game a couple weeks ago, and he loves every minute of it. Yeah. He loves I shouldn't say every minute of it. I'll tell you in a second here what he doesn't like. But what he loves is, the cool thing about the hockey game is the action is always,
it's always
even
going.
when the action stops, there's rockin' music playing in the background, and Rhett loves classic rock. Maybe because he rides around on the golf cart with his daddy listening to classic rock, and he puts his one finger up in the air, and so it doesn't matter if they're playing Pearl Jam or Motley Crue or whatever it is in the event center. He's just
wait a minute. Those are classic rock now?
They are, actually.
Shoot.
Yes.
Eddie Vedder's old.
Wow, you're old.
I know, for sure. He doesn't like it when the team score because I should rephrase that. He doesn't like it when our team scores. When the Mavericks score, because the foghorn goes off and it is loud. And then all of a sudden he gets scared and he's crawled up, and he'll get over that. But he loves going to that hockey game, and it is a cool thing. You know what's also really cool, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, having, us being small town Midwest guys who didn't really grow up around the sport, be it soccer or hockey, and in this case hockey, how many people in this community who probably also didn't grow up around it love going to those games. I mean, I can't compare it. I don't know. I've heard about Wichita and some of the other people in the league, or I don't know. Are they even still in the same league?
They are.
I mean, some of these places get decent turnouts, but I would have to bet that Kansas City has one of the best turnouts, right?
Oh, they do. And they have a new regime in there now. Mike Shikani is the new president, and he is going after a younger crowd. And oh my God, what he's doing is amazing. They had a Tuesday night playoff game this past Tuesday. Nearly 3,700 people there on a school night. A game that wasn't on the schedule. In the playoffs, you have to go with arena availability, and I mean, half that crowd was kids, and those kids bring mom and dad. They bring older brothers and sisters. They want to keep following the team. And It's great, and the Comets are following the same path. And what the Comets do that is genius is invite all these youth leagues.
Oh yeah,
give the
smart.
kids tickets.
That's
well,
smart.
The kids need a ride to that game.
Sure.
And then they need popcorn and nachos and
hot dogs. Yep.
pennants and whatever
Dippin'
else
Dots,
they sell. Yeah,
got to get the
things.
Dippin' Dots.
All the things.
But it's so cool because, the guys on the Comets don't make a lot of money. Some of the, better well-known players do. But all these guys coach teams. Mm-hmm. And Rion Marquez, one of the top players on the team, the big Brazilian, coaches several teams out in Lee Summit and Blue Springs. They all live up north because they practice at the soccer dome up off Front Street. But so many of them have teams that they coach. And their players come up after the game, and it's just like a family reunion, and it's so cool that they do that.
What you said that they don't make a lot of money. You're talking about the Comets, right? Mm-hmm. What would you say is an average salary for a player? Or I mean, just to get some perspective. I mean, dude, they can't be doing that full time. There's probably
none of them do it full time.
Yeah,
so they have a couple that drive Mercedes. Well, one is a financial advisor for Northwest Mutual.
Okay.
Nicolo Neto, their goalie, who is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. $400 a week maybe. They pay for their lodging.
Okay.
But a lot of them, don't make, and they have to work to keep their work visas. Some of the kids from Brazil or
right.
Mexico, things like that.
Well, that was the other question, is that in order for them, they would have to have the flexibility with an employer that would allow them to be gone to play soccer,
right.
to have a second stream of income. There'd be a tough employer to allow that, right?
When Danny Waltman was here, he was the icon, the face of the league, the most popular player in the history of this franchise.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be taking shots off the face in practice, working his butt off, go in, take a shower, put on his work belt with his hammer and all that, and he roughed in houses. I couldn't believe it when I saw that the first time.
Okay.
So I know nothing about the sport as far as like what their season looks like. So a season is
22 games.
Okay.
Or 24 games. You play 12 at home. Over
12 weeks, 24 weeks. Is it one game a week?
From like late November to it just ended 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
They didn't make a deep run in the playoffs. But
they practice every day?
Every day, yeah. A lot of times they start at like 8.
Wow.
And get off at 10.
So then these guys get done with practice and they go straight to work?
Go to work. One of them works at UMKC in the grounds department.
Now on the hockey side, though, because that has scaled. Like you mentioned in the beginning, it was just a step up beyond a beer league. Now
it's the ECHL.
Okay.
And they have high draft picks that play that, might make close to $1 million. Wow. And it's fun.
So are they a minor league team for the NHL?
Oh, yeah, they are.
Okay, that's what I thought.
It's just like baseball.
Sure.
It's tiered. You have the NHL, then you have the AHL, American Hockey League.
Okay.
That's where they want to get to. The Mavericks Association is with the Seattle Kraken in the NHL. Okay. And then the Coachella Firebirds, which is a first-year team. And they've been great sending players down. They called up the Mavericks' best player, and this kid will be in the NHL next year, I'd bet my life, Jeremy McKenna.
Okay.
He was an all-star. And, when people ask me what it's like, well, Alex Gordon was a superstar at Omaha.
Yeah.
And sorry, Omaha fans, but he's going to help the Royals. Well, that's how it is now.
Okay, so would you say then, and sorry for my ignorance, but then the Kansas City Mavericks would be considered as it is a
double A.
Double A. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, so Coachella's triple A, and they're double A.
Okay, so like back in the day when you talked about Alex Gordon, he's double A would have been in Wichita.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Now they're in like Arkansas or something like that, right?
Right.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we talked about in the beginning of this episode that at some point you've got a very strong testimony and, something that I think could potentially be helpful and bring awareness to some others that's coming up in just a bit. And we're going to take a little break here in just a second. But there is a very interesting story, and I think Jillian might appreciate this story about your internship in New York. and I
have you ever had a guest who slept in Madonna's bedroom?
I guess you did.
Okay.
Oh my. Well, that does sound interesting.
Well, I think you slept in it before Madonna got there.
Long before Madonna.
Okay.
Me and Geraldo Rivera's cat.
Yes, right. So tell the story real quick before we take a break and we come back with some deeper stuff.
Went to Northwest Missouri State University. I loved watching Goodnight America with Geraldo Rivera. This was back at the time when he was an icon in journalism. He'd won the Peabody Award for a series he did on this god-awful facility in New Jersey where they took people and they were laying in their feces. It was horrible. He broke in through a window, brought a camera crew in there, and he was the toast of New York. He came to Northwest Missouri State.
Wow.
He was showing the Zapruder film, Abraham Zapruder, of the John Kennedy assassination, proving, I mean, you watch this and there's just no way you could say that one guy did it. I picked him up at the airport. I was on the student council staff there. Drove him up. We hit it off. He spent all day at my farm up in Northwest, and he goes, hey, he said, would you like to spend the summer as an intern at ABC?
Whoa.
First time this Independence kid had ever been on a plane.
Oh, my
Oh,
God.
really? Yeah.
Fly to New York. He said, I can't pay you, but he said, I promise you'll have a good time, and I'll find you a place to live. I lived with him. He lived 4 blocks east or south of the Dakota. Spent a lot of time at the Dakota. Never saw John Lennon. I was so bummed about that.
Oh.
But where he lived, at the apartments, you had the whole floor.
Okay.
Paul Simon lived in there.
Wow.
It was just.
Did you come across a lot of these celebrities that lived in that building?
Met a few of them, and the coolest thing though, he said, what would you like to get from this? And I said, I just want to see what real journalism, broadcast journalism is like. Yeah. And I'd like to meet your father-in-law. His father-in-law at the time was Kurt Vonnegut, the writer.
Oh.
So the Madonna story, I went back in 1984 and was covering the Chiefs. Playing the Jets. Mm-hmm. And I went by the apartment hoping I'd see him. And he jogs right by me like 30 seconds after I'm on the sidewalk. He couldn't believe it. He says, forget about the hotel. You're spending the night here.
Oh, wow.
So he was in an apartment, and then he later sold it to Madonna.
Okay.
So that was the Madonna deal.
So what year? Okay. So what year were you?
I was there in 75.
Okay.
The summer of 75. I went back to cover the Chiefs playoffs in 84.
84. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But he calls me one day at the office, and he goes, hey, are you doing anything tonight? And I said, no. And he said, okay, be home at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, doorbell rings. I said, go get the door. And it was Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh, wow.
And, oh, man, that was
that was a big deal for you.
That was surreal. Yeah, that was pretty crazy.
And you got to spend some time with him and talk all evening. Yeah. No kidding.
We had just gone to Muhammad Ali's training camp in Philadelphia, and Vonnegut was a huge boxing fan and huge Ali fan. Talked about that a lot. And, I had to ask him about Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, all the things that I'd read in high school. And that was a pretty cool night.
Wow.
After having that experience and then coming back and spending 40 years in Kansas City, did you ever have aspirations to go and why not?
Just too big. I mean, where ABC was located, right, just within the same block was a school for the blind. Those people walked faster than I did. I mean, the pace was unbelievable. I felt comfortable there because he was so welcoming to me. And his mom and dad, Rosie and Al, they adopted me. I mean, we were out at their home in Long Island eating family meals on the weekends, and it was amazing, and I mean, I'm a sophomore in high school. Yeah. I mean, in college. So, there were no job offers, but I couldn't live. I have so much respect. I have so much respect for the folks who just live there.
Yeah.
I mean, the lady who right outside of ABC is selling newspapers, and she has her baby in a crib right next.
It's just a whole different way of life.
It
It's a
is,
whole different
man.
world. Yeah.
It is. I was sad when it was over because he got me tickets to every Broadway play at the time.
Wow.
I went to the world premiere of Rollerball with James Caan, which is one of my favorite movies. He had a show called Good Night America.
Yeah. See, okay. So you started talking. I want to hear the story.
Yeah.
But my first knowledge of Geraldo Rivera is
The Al Capone deal?
Al
daytime-
Capone?
No, the daytime talk show,
Oh.
like Oprah or Phil Donahue or whatever.
The throwing
That's
chairs.
right.
Yeah, and it was kind of like it was before Jerry Springer, and it was kind of the wild.
There was times he got bloodied up. In it.
He got hit by and hit. He's on the cover of Newsweek or Time, and it's just this, the pixelated picture of Geraldo with blood streaming down his face.
So I didn't even realize that he was a big deal before that.
And that's what, people say, Geraldo Rivera, what a joke. And, his reputation has been so sullied, and I hate that because he had a convertible Volkswagen. He'd be driving down the streets, and I mean, like, the cops on horseback would come up and give him a high five. He could park anywhere he wanted. He could do anything he wanted.
he was a cool dude.
He was awesome. Yeah.
So then was the talk show that I remember, which would probably be in the 80s?
Yeah,
I would assume?
late 80s.
Late 80s,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
So was that like obviously he had a whole nother era of a career that had come to an end, like by choice?
Well, isn't it fair to say that Al Capone thing
That hurt him.
that did not do him any favors, and you probably are not familiar with that.
Well, no, but I've heard that reference, but I thought that was like after the talk show.
No,
it was
just
right
gets
around the same time, wasn't
it
it?
was, yeah.
It
Yeah.
gets referenced still. And then now, I don't even know if he does stuff now, but like,
He's on Fox.
Yeah.
okay, he is on, I knew it was like more politics driven.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So what was your assessment of that? Because he got made fun of big. So he got slaughtered over the Al Capone. I remember watching it. I was a kid watching
watched
it. I was like,
Yeah,
"What's
are you
this hidden
kidding?
treasure that you're going to find?" And all that we found was like just bottles.
Yeah,
No, just-
a couple of bottles. Yeah, I know.
Look, we found a bottle. We're on the right track, and then there was no track. Like
He came to Kansas City after that and did a story on Bob Bertola, the serial killer who had
Bob
the
Berdella?
market or Berdella.
Berdella, yeah.
Down
Yeah,
at
yeah.
City Market or what's the place down there with the famous hamburgers. He had a little shop.
I was
Flea
thinking,
market? Westport
The
Flea Market?
Westport Flea Market.
Oh, okay.
And he had like skulls and crazy
He
stuff
had stuff
in there.
buried in his backyard.
Yeah.
Like it'd been years and years of
Really?
Yeah. So
crazy. Yeah.
Geraldo came down and did a story on it, and we got together for lunch. And I had to ask him. I said, "What about Al Capone?" He says, "The only thing that's going to be written on my headstone is Al Capone's vault was empty."
Yeah.
And he made a fortune, but man, I know if he could take it back, he would have never done that.
But did he have some sort of, or did he share with you any detail? I mean,
Like, why was it even a thing? Why was he involved?
What he had to have had or thought he gotten some good, credible information or intel that would allowed him to put himself.
And then was that somebody trying to sabatage him with like terrible
Do you
information?
know?
I don't know.
Did he never share? He never shared any details of that?
I asked him. I said, what about it? And he said, we thought there was some good stuff in there. He thought there might
man.
actually within the vault be a safe that had all sorts of crazy stuff in it.
Yeah, they had,
Weapons and who knows? I mean, it was his vault. It was in his house. It was, that was or not his house, but his
business, right?
business area.
Yeah.
And
There was a whole construction crew with jackhammers in there and
for
cutting
like 2 hours.
I've heard of it. I don't
sledgehammers
remember
and
that
breaking
part.
down concrete
And
walls and stuff. It was
nothing.
insane. Yeah, nothing ever came
Mm.
of that. Well, that was some great storytelling, buddy. I appreciate. One of the you talk about when we had Ryan Lefevre on. One of the things that he said, and this is kind of going back to George Brett, but Ryan Lefevre said that George Brett was a great storyteller, one of the best storytellers.
Amazing.
I think that you might be up there on his level. You've got so many great stories. So, but when we come back, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. I had asked Bill to come on the show to share a lot of these great sports stories in the 40 years that he's been covering in this town. But being that I am close to the family, I also knew something that might be difficult to talk about, but it could also be very powerful. and maybe helping anybody else. And so we're going to dive deeper into that when we get back into episode 37 with Bill Althaus on the Papa Ron Podcast.
The Papa Ron Podcast is brought to you by the award-winning Heartland Waterfowl, airing each week on Sportsman's Channel. Check out heartlandwaterfowl.com for airtimes and be sure to browse their online store. Also, subscribe to the Heartland Waterfowl YouTube channel and watch their new original series, including their podcast, Behind the Blind. Check it out, and don't doubt the scout. Now, back to the Papa Ron Podcast. Here's Ronnie Phillips and Jillian Gregg.
Papa Ron Podcast also brought to you by Clean AF, Clean Polish Protect, specifically formulated to protect, beautify surfaces, including plastic, vinyl, rubber, and carbon fiber. Water-resistant formulation, safe to use on gloss or matte finishes, and makes the cleanup process easier by forming a durable coating that repels mud, dirt, and debris. Apply, lightly buff to a dry sheen. Perfect for all power enthusiasts. Check it out online at cleanabsolutelyflawless.com or at Dell's Power Sports in Green Valley, Missouri. Back with Bill Althaus. Uncle Bill. Uncle Bill is here. By the way, your picture that you gave me for Christmas a couple of years ago of a signature of former President Donald Trump is a great conversation piece for every single person who walks in the door to be a guest on the Papa Ron Podcast. So I really appreciate that. That was pretty neat. By the way, how is it that you have access to all of these people to get these autographs?
Well, a good friend of mine is a real heavy hitter in the Republican Party.
Okay.
And, if you needed Joe Biden, there's no way I could help you there. But I asked my friend if he could get something signed by Trump for you, and he did.
Oh, that was really cool. Yeah, and unfortunately, there hasn't been any kickback or nobody's barked or said anything, but a majority of the people, like we had Mark Alford, who came in, and so we got a picture taken underneath that picture. We got Chris DeGaulle, who you might know as a conservative talk show host. So he was on the show and naturally saw that and loved it.
I'm hoping we can get Tucker Carlson now that he's not doing anything. Maybe we can get him as a
what's
guest,
going on with that? So was he
Crazy.
fired or was he not fired? That is the question.
Yeah.
Do we know?
They've come out with all these emails that they uncovered in the defamation lawsuit with the voting machine folks and Dominion, and boy, he said some pretty crazy stuff. And I don't know.
I don't know anything. I just know that they parted ways. Some say he wasn't fired. Some say he was fired. And I have not seen anything that is specifically given a reason as to why they parted ways.
No.
And in case you're listening to this, who knows when, this is literally 2 days after, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're recording
right, exactly.
at this point.
Yes, it is April 26, 2023.
But wouldn't you think, if that's the case, and I know this is a total rabbit hole, but wouldn't you think that any contributor like that, like a show host, especially involving politics, okay, but especially maybe on the conservative side, maybe not, maybe also on the Democrat side, don't you think they could go back and find all kinds of things that people say and imply and what's the other word? Not just imply, but accuse, that would be accusatory, that could be used as defamation. And I know there are specific guidelines or things that this is defamation, this is not. But don't you think with something like that, as long as that whole thing went on about voting machines, how could he not have said things that would be considered that? And you could probably take any topic involving politics of a story that went, that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks of talking about how there maybe was a problem with voting machines. Whether there was or not, it doesn't matter. It was being talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's crazy. That, you'd think, oh my gosh.
Well, he's a commentator, and
not only a commentator, he was the most rated show on the entire network.
I know it.
Right, but he's got to have things to say. That's what he's
exactly.
doing. He's filling hours a week talking about what people are talking about.
Yeah.
So
now, Don Lemon did get fired.
We do know that one.
Yeah.
saw that.
And surprised it took that long. So do you have any heavy hitters that can get Tucker Carlson's autograph? Jillian sounds like she's real interested in getting Tucker's autograph.
You need to get
I
George
want him
Brennan here because
here.
he's a big Trump
man. If I had somebody that I knew that could swing that bat to hook that up,
I would die.
Yeah,
that would be pretty cool.
I would die.
Good thing, if you know anybody, Bill, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I actually do have a good friend who is working on Skylar. So hopefully maybe someday down the road. And then, of course, if that doesn't work out, I know a guy in Bill Althaus who might be able to help us out. But anyway, we're really grateful to have you here. This is the part in the show that might be a little uncomfortable. And just again, before we get started, let me say how much I appreciate your vulnerability and your willingness to tell the testimony of your family, because it wasn't just you and it wasn't just your son. It was an entire family ordeal that was difficult to go through. And let me also say, because it's probably, I would be remiss, I would be willing to bet that your son, Sean, will likely listen to this. So I want him to hear straight from my mouth how much I appreciate his approval for you telling his story, basically. So Sean had I guess I'll just open it up with this. Sean had a struggle with substance abuse for several years. And there was a couple times that were very scary, where we didn't know if he was going to make it. And I guess what I would like for you to do, to your level of comfort, is just kind of share his story and what that was like as a parent, how you guys worked through that as a family. And the good news of all of this is that Sean is doing great today. He is recovered. He's crushing it out there in the workforce. And all of us are so proud of him.
It's amazing.
But I want to use this opportunity, use our platform, your platform as being a notable figure in the community, to kind of pull back the curtain, let people kind of know you on a more personal level, and maybe somebody who's got a family member, a son, a daughter, or somebody who's struggling with substance abuse, hear your story and maybe might be able to provide them some hope.
Absolutely. And, I'm more than willing to tell this story to anyone. I spoke to Sean on my way over here, and he goes, "Dad, I'm proud of you for doing this." He says, "Hope you get through it."
Yeah.
I mean,
thank you, Sean.
Yes.
How old is Sean, by the way?
Sean is 35.
Okay.
He is now a recovery coach for Epic Recovery.
Wow.
He is the guy that when somebody comes in who is overdosed, who is really struggling, he goes through a process with them on how they can get clean and sober. He just got this job a couple of months ago.
Okay.
Before that, he was a peer counselor with Sauna Lake, and he was in charge of a house of guys. 3 of the guys that were in there had been in recovery with him.
Oh, wow.
When he was trying to recover from his opioid addiction.
And how long has he been sober?
He's been sober 3 years.
Okay.
Was an addict. Always will be an addict, but struggled with it 16 years.
Oh, my.
This is 16 years of head-on car collisions, hit and runs, being arrested several times. And as Ronnie alluded to a little bit ago, and my wife Stacy, she just simply can't talk about this anymore, and it's hard for me to, but he OD'd and died 3 times. He was not breathing. And
so you're saying almost 20 years?
Yes.
Because 16 years of struggling, 3 years
then,
sober.
yes.
So almost 20. He's 35. So we're talking about
15 years old. Yeah, smoking marijuana in the basement.
Okay.
Then he had a friend who said, "Hey, you got to try this," and it was opioids. His mom could get them, and I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
He, you hear about working alcoholics. Well, Sean was a working drug addict.
Functioning alcoholic.
Functioning, yes,
Yeah.
yes. He's in the Green Valley Sports Hall of Fame. Was a point guard on the best basketball team they ever had. He was one of the most popular kids in school, kid that just lit up the room when he walked in.
Yeah, very personable. Oh, very, very personable.
And eventually, he's shooting up heroin between his toes in our basement.
Wow.
The first time he OD'd, I was writing a book on Dante Hall. Mm-hmm. I was up very late. I would usually work on the books between 11 and 3 a.m. He came home staggering, went down to his bed downstairs. I went down, basically carried him upstairs because I knew something bad was going to happen.
And he's how old at this point, would you say?
Oh, he's a senior in high school.
Okay.
So I get him upstairs, and we have a spare bedroom right next to my office, and I hear a sound like I've never heard before. It was like a wild animal. It was just this rush of air that I went in, and he wasn't breathing. And my wife's a nurse, went in and got her. And she, this like 3 a.m, and she's like, "Oh my God, he's not breathing. We got to do something." I said, "Do you want me to call 911?" She said, "No, we don't have time for that." Put him in the back seat of my car. She was doing CPR on him, mouth to mouth CPR while this foamy, horrible stuff. And man, she's just given that CPR. I mean, she's amazing. Took him to St. Mary's Hospital in Blue Springs. As we pulled up, the lady at the desk looked out and saw Stacy giving him CPR through the window. And before I even got on the car or got to their door, staff members were out with a gurney. They put him on the gurney, and the lead nurse says, get him in there. He's not breathing. I never knew this. They have a little room at St. Mary's for folks that they know that their individual that they brought in isn't going to make it. We were in that room for 2.5 hours. Had no idea what was going on. And
is that where your wife worked?
No, she works at Center Point.
Oh, okay.
St. Mary's was just closer, much closer. We live out in Green Valley. So eventually, doctor comes in, and he goes, "Are you the mother of Sean?" And she said, "Yes." And he goes, "Come here." And he said, "I want to give you a hug. You saved your son's life." That was the first time. He also OD'd in his driveway off Vesper in Blue Springs, and a guy across the street saw it, gave him CPR until the police got there. And there's this drug that I knew nothing about called Narcan. And it's an inhaler. You snap it, put it under their nose, and I don't know what it does, but it snapped him out of it when they were there. Yeah. This one was really bad. Took him to St. Mary's again, and he had round-the-clock nursing for 7 days, one-on-one nursing, because he had taken so many drugs. They pumped his stomach, and the doctor there said he had enough pills in his stomach to kill a rhinoceros. What? And I would ask him about this and say, well, he goes, "Dad," "I don't take drugs to get high. I take drugs to feel normal." That's the toughest thing I've ever heard him say. Bipolar, all these different medical conditions that he was dealing with, severe anxiety. So the third time it happened was in our basement. He had a friend over. Friend came running up. It was late at night, and he goes, "Something's wrong with Sean." One of the staff of one of the hospitals gave me 2 Narcan capsules and said, "I hope you never have to use these." But he's down, convulsing, foaming, and then just nothing. I gave him the Narcan. His friend called 911. Stacy wasn't home at that time. She did get there before he left. And this was the first time it happened at our house. So we have, 4 police cars and an ambulance and a fire truck and, everybody there.
The first time was at your house, but you took him to the hospital, right?
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, the first time was at the house. Second time was in his driveway. This was at the house. But the first time, we put him in a car and took him. Right. This time we called 911. And so, that's when you got to start talking to your neighbors about it. They want to know what's going on.
Sure.
So 2 police officers came, and they were amazing because he had pills, cocaine all over his dresser in there, had a gun in there. And this policeman came in. He goes, "Hey, Dad, I need to show you something." He goes, "You've got enough on your mind tonight. All I ask is that you get him help." Well, each time he had OD'd, he went to Valley Hope in Booneville, Missouri. and left there happy, ready to go. And then eventually he told us it was great because you could get all the names of people you could get drugs from up there.
Oh
it did
gosh.
nothing to help him. But it was the first aspect of this that helped me, because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday they had family counseling at 8:00. So I'd make the drive from Grain Valley up there, and the first day of counseling, this counselor was awesome. I don't know her real name, but everybody called her Mean Jean. She was the drill instructor. So
Her.
Yeah. Yeah. So she said, okay, I want anybody in here who thinks that they're the cause of your person's problem, raise your hand. I'm the first person.
Sure.
Took him to see AC/DC when he was 10 years old. Took him to every professional wrestling match. Took him to rock concerts.
You honestly felt like you were the reason for why he really?
Yeah. And it was killing me. That was the absolute worst part of all this, because my oldest son, Zach, you make a blueprint for a perfect kid. It's Zach.
Yeah.
You know,
smart, athletic.
Don't you think any parent would feel that way though? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I haven't been in those shoes, but I would think at some point, because it started when he was still a kid in your home.
I should have noticed it. I should have caught something.
Gotcha.
I could, I was the fixer. I mean, if anything's going on, man, I know everybody. I can take care of it.
Sure.
And I mean, it's an illness. You don't want to have cancer. You don't want to have diabetes.
Right.
You don't want to be a drug addict, but there's just something that clicks.
Okay.
And the only reason my wife is still here today, the only reason I'm still here today is because of Al-Anon, a program that parents, brothers and sisters, anybody that has an addict in their family go to. We've been going 6 years, so we were there at the height of all this. The phone calls at 3 a.m. to get him out of jail. The babbling phone calls from him that we couldn't even understand. I didn't know Arrowhead has a jail, but they do. I had to get Sean out of it twice.
Really?
They call it a holding area.
Like a holding cell.
Stacy is now the head of Alateen for the state of Missouri.
Wow.
For kids whose parents are alcoholics. And she just took 6 kids to their big convention in Tan-Terre, and they just rocked it. These kids love her. And she can't really talk about it because it's confidential.
Yeah.
What you see here, what you say here, let it stay here when you leave here. But she is making an amazing impact on people. We go to a meeting in Blue Springs every Saturday morning at 9:00. Ronnie, I'm covering a game on a Friday night. I get home and write my story. I get to bed about 1:30. I wouldn't miss one of those meetings if my life depended on it.
Sounds like your life does depend on it, or did depend.
It does depend. It still does.
Does it? Mm-hmm. Does it? Okay. So, but are you? And I'm not trying to argue that. Sorry if that came across that way. What I'm asking is that are you better? Are you feeling some peace within your inner peace? And Stacy,
yes,
for not feeling like you are the reason for. But is there still progress to be had? Or is there still a road ahead of you? What does that look like? Because I have no understanding of that.
Every time the phone rings at our house,
anxiety.
My heart stops.
Yeah, I bet. Oof.
Especially a 9:30 phone call, 11 o'clock phone call. And Sean has worked for these 2 rehab centers, is now working with Epic, but he's also working 3 nights a week as a waiter at McCormick and Schmick downtown.
Gotcha.
And he calls us every night when he gets off work just to let us know how it went, how well he's doing. The phone calls from him now, once I know it's him and everything's good, are the joys of their Christmas.
Yeah.
Every time he calls, it's like Christmas.
That's awesome.
But, oh my God, post-traumatic stress it is so real. And Stacy went to a counselor for a while, and they tested her, and the guy told her, your post-traumatic stress is probably worse than anybody who was affected by something in an accident, in war, because it's something with your child, with someone in your family.
And she was so actively involved in those moments, those life-saving moments of he was 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
So did he ever have a stretch of being sober before now?
He had 1 6-month stretch, which we thought, they always tell you, they're going to be pratfalls. There's going to be something happen, and there was with him on several occasions. At the height of his addiction, we didn't know where he was for 2 years. We didn't know if he was alive. We didn't know if he was dead.
Man, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was working on a crew climbing cell phone towers. And not a good situation to be in. And
was there a falling out between you two why was there not communication for 2 years?
He wasn't Sean. We just simply couldn't deal with the stress of one, when he lived at the house. Is he coming home? When is he coming home? Is he going to come home drunk?
Yeah.
You're the mom and dad, and it's a little hard to be like, well, I'm going to go to bed now at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And
can't.
Yeah. You just stay up all night with anxiety, wondering.
It's horrible.
I can't imagine.
I mean, there were days that I couldn't get out of bed. I mean, I think deep, I haven't had any counseling, but deep in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if I don't get out of bed, I don't have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. I never missed a day of work. The only person I told at work about it was our sports editor, just so he would know in case something big happened.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But, he was on the road with these crews, and he, wasn't living at home. And when he was at home, I'd take him at 5:30 in the morning and meet the crew, and they might go to Omaha, or they might go to Tulsa, work on a crew. I mean, these are like, I took him lunch one time when he was working at one of these cell phone towers in Oak Grove. And I thought, well, where the hell is he? It was so high up, I couldn't even see him on the top of this.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't climb stairs that have slats where you see. I'm freakishly afraid of heights. So
we're laughing because there's been times we've all been creeped out of that.
Oh,
same
yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah.
So Stacy heard about Al-Anon. We went on a Sunday afternoon, and I walk in, and right across from me on the hall was a hand-painted sign done in crayons that says, "Don't even try changing them." But the C was really faded from sunlight or something. So it looked like it said, "Don't even try hanging them." And I have used that, and every time I have ever talked to anybody associated, because if I could have hung him and got away with it, I might have done it. All I did was cry.
Yeah.
I couldn't say a thing. It was a small group. There was a guy in there. We noticed an 18-wheel pickup mobile out in the parking lot, and he came up to me and he goes, I'm so glad you're here. I know it's your first time, and he said, I'm always here for you. Gave me his cell phone number. I never called him.
He was a truck driver.
Okay. And he would schedule his routes to where he could go to an Al-Anon meeting.
Oh, wow. And
it was his children, 2 children that he was dealing with. And I'm like, how can these people even talk? How can they, I didn't want to go back because I'm like, I'm dealing with all this. I can't breathe most of the time. Mm-hmm. I'm watching my son slowly kill himself.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hear about other people's problems.
Yeah.
But when you do keep going back, you're talking to people that know what you're talking about, and that's huge.
They know how you feel.
One of my best friends would call me, said, "Hey, I haven't heard from you in a month. I know something's going on. What's up?" Talk to him. He goes, "I know just how you're feeling." No. You've never given your kid CPR on the floor, not knowing where he was for 2 years. And, you know, when he eventually came back home, Sean, a lady that worked at a bus station in Omaha had seen him in there, sleeping in there and nothing to, you know, sleeping on a duffel bag. And she talked to him and gave him the money for the bus ride home. And when that happened, I said to myself, and I said to God, if I ever meet anybody that needs help, I'm going to help them. Mm-hmm. You know, and I don't want to delve off the subject, but 2 weeks ago, I'm in Green Valley late at night to interview somebody that's opening a new cornhole facility in Green Valley, a kid that graduated from the high school. And I'm sitting in my car, and somebody knocks on the window, and it's this young kid. Looked like Sean when he was 21 years old. And he goes, I'm struggling. He said, I don't have any money, and I need to get to Independence. And I said, hop in, let's go. All the time I'm thinking, what have I gotten myself into? But he was awesome. And when Sean changed, and he doesn't know what happened, and I don't know what happened, but 2.5 years ago, I heard about an organization in Independence called the Good Foundation. If you go to Independence and go to the Inglewood Art District, as you turn off Winter Road into Inglewood there's a big 2-story older home. That's the headquarters. In there, they've got 20 monitors. They've got people looking at all those monitors, and they're for all the houses where they have the addicts that they're trying to help.
Okay.
I called them up. They said, we'd love to help, but you're looking at 8 weeks. Well, and I don't know if he'd want me to give him credit, but Bob Buckley, a lawyer in Independence, who was the PA announcer for the William Chrisman boys and girls basketball teams.
Okay.
I sit next to Bob, have sat next to him for 10 years, and he knew about Sean's situation. So I called him. And I said, Bob, I've heard about this, and I know you're somewhat involved with it. He goes, what'd they tell you? And I told him, he goes, let me make a phone call. He calls me back in 2 minutes, and he goes, can you be there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? And that's where everything changed for Sean.
Wow.
You know, the kid's been dead 3 times. He's been in a head-on collision. He's been in a hit-and-run collision. And it changed there. He says, I'm laying there one night, and I'm like, I got to change my life. And within a month, he was the leader of the quadrant where he was living. Mm-hmm. From there, that's where he got the job with Sona Lake as a peer counselor. And the people at Epic, this new, really large rehab center that's come into Kansas City, heard about him, and he's now working for them. And you know, I was a big fan of Taxi, the TV show. And they had an episode where Elaine Nardo's son, one of the taxi drivers, wanted a bicycle. And Elaine said, well, if you really want it, someday we'll make it happen. And so the next morning they're at breakfast, and her little boy says, you know, I prayed to God about getting a bicycle. Well, he didn't get it for Christmas. And she was devastated. Mm-hmm. And she goes, well, what do you think now? And she goes, well, I mean, God answered my prayer. He just said no. Yeah. Well, God said no to us for 16 years. Yeah. I hated God. I'm like, you know, we never quit going to church, but
you were really challenged.
Oh man, was I challenged. And Stacy has the strongest conviction of anyone I know. If there's anyone who needs help, if there's anyone at the church, any function going on, she was the first one to volunteer. And I'm just walking through the motions. Yeah. And oh my God, it was brutal.
So when you would hear someone say, "Oh, God will use it. God will make everything work out for good," right? Because I mean that's what the Bible says, and it is true. But when
God's always by your side.
When you're in the middle of it, unfortunately, those things. Yeah. You'd probably rather been punched in the gut.
Oh, absolutely. Stuff, right? Yeah. And, you know, I hear it every Sunday or, you know, different things. And, but when Sean called us from, the Good Foundation and said, hey, I'm done. He said, I'm getting my life turned around. I got a, he has no credit whatsoever. His credit rating now is up in the 600s. He's got an apartment downtown.
Good.
Has a car. First car he's had since he totaled the one in the head-on collision. He didn't have 9 lives. He had 90 lives during all this. Never got anybody pregnant, which we were so thankful for, because we're, hoping one day he'll have a grandchild and it'll be with somebody he'll spend the rest of his life with.
Sure.
And I talked at the meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I said, when I come in here and there are some people that are really struggling, and I said, I feel guilty because the light at the end of the tunnel is no longer an oncoming train. It's the light that's surrounding my son and all the good he's doing.
Yeah.
And I had a guy who's been going to that longer than me, and he goes, I don't ever want to hear that again. I don't ever want to hear you say that you're guilty, because you're an inspiration to everyone here. And we can all just grasp on to something and realize that good things can happen even though they aren't happening right now.
Yeah.
And I've told this story to countless students, athletes, friends in high school. I've shared it with teachers. I've had people call me and ask me if I'd come talk to somebody, a student who's struggling with the wrong decisions.
Yeah.
And that's the greatest compliment anybody can pay me. And I'm very willing. I'm very open to talk about it. I never hid it, but I'm the type guy that keeps everything bottled up inside.
Yeah.
That's why, somebody might call me and say, I haven't heard from you in months. I know something bad's happening. Tell me.
Yeah.
And, that's when you know who your really good friends are. Somebody that cares. So 16 years, every day I say a prayer, 3 years later, going on 19 years, that things are great, but I can close my eyes and still see Stacy giving him CPR in the backseat of our car.
Right.
But do you sleep better now?
I do sleep better now, but I still deal with it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm going to have to deal with it the rest of my life, but it's not all consuming.
Yeah.
It's not the first thing I think about when I wake up. It's not the first thing I think about before I go to bed.
Yeah.
But, there are those moments.
Sure.
And Ronnie, come on, man. It took me years to quit biting my fingernails. This kid, 3 years, has given up opioids, heroin, everything. And it's a miracle. He is a walking, talking.
And he's serving others.
Exactly.
He's using his testimony to help others. I know, Jill, you had a question.
I was just going to say, so do you feel differently now about Romans 8:28, or about people saying, "Oh yeah, God can use it for good"? Is that something that you can hear it now and go,
I've apologized to God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, totally feel differently.
Yeah. Because your wife is in now. You said she's working with what's it called with the teenagers? Alateen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she and Sean have this amazing relationship. The other day he was out at the house, moving into a new apartment, and stayed with us. And it's, we're back from the meeting, and Sean and Stacy are cooking breakfast, which they used to do all the time. And I'm looking at that, and I just started crying.
I'll bet.
I'm like, oh my God. Our Sean, the Sean we knew before all this, is back.
Yeah.
And one thing they talk about in Al-Anon is separating with love. Not separating with anger or separating with hate, but separating with love. And I thank God every day that Stacy's still with us, because the effect this had on her life was, I'm a writer. I can't even tell you what it was like. And to see the person you love most in the world struggling, crying, desperate, wanting an answer. Yeah.
Is Al-Anon or I can't
Alateen.
I don't know why I can't remember that. That's not that
so
hard.
So those are two different things, Alateen and Al-Anon, right?
There's Alcoholics Anonymous.
Uh-huh.
Al-Anon for somebody that you love or somebody that you're involved with struggles. And then Alateen is for the kids. I think it's 11 to 19-year-olds.
Okay.
Whose parents
are
struggle.
addicts. Okay. So are any of those faith-based?
Oh, yes.
Or is the Good Foundation faith-based? I'm just curious.
No, they're all faith-based.
Because I've heard people that either have someone in I don't know if I've known someone personally who's been in Alcoholics Anonymous, but you see it in movies and stuff, and it seems like faith could be part of the 12-step program in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if someone didn't already have an established faith, they might not consider it faith-based. Is kind of what it has been explained like, that it's kind
Absolutely.
of generic. It can be faith-based if you want it to be faith-based, but it doesn't have to be.
It's a higher power.
Higher power. Okay.
Now, even though I was mad at him for 16 years, my higher power was God.
Sure.
When Sean started, his higher power was just something in the cosmos that is helping him get through this. And he's now going to church. Mm-hmm. And
so did he not believe in God? Do you think when he was a teenager?
I don't know, because we raised him in the church.
Right. That's what I'm wondering,
he and his brother, when they grew up and were out of the house, neither one of them went to church. Mm-hmm. He believes in God now. Mm. He goes to church down by the plaza, and he leads a group. Leads an AA group, I think, on Thursday nights. He tries to go to 3 or 4 meetings a week. Mm-hmm. And, you want to talk about little skinny pencil neck kids. He was one growing up. Mm-hmm. He spends 2 hours a day in the gym.
Good.
He's got 24-inch pythons, man. I mean,
Hulk Hogan's
got, he is buff. He is in such great
I have not seen him in so long.
I know.
I would love to see him.
That's one thing that he never, has felt comfortable around.
Is he still holding shame? You think that's what it is?
I think so, probably. Just, maybe not so much holding shame, but just wondering what people think of him when they don't know the whole story. And that's why it's so cool to tell this story, because this kid is a rock star. I mean, to beat the addiction and to be giving back, to be a counselor and a coach. He called me the other day. He was called to a hospital. A 68-year-old woman involved in this epic, I don't know why I can't remember that, epic recovery. OD'd and was in the hospital. And he was the person that went and talked to her. Mm. And he goes, Dad, I left and I've never felt so good. Mm. She listened to me, and, I'm going to work with her, and we're going to try to, help her get, go through the recovery process and get her life back. And he said, I didn't think I would ever have a life again. We have his 2 dogs and I call them rescue dogs, because we'd go over there and these poor dogs would be in a 1 foot by 2 foot kennel, 2 little mini dachshunds. And, it's so funny that when he comes, and especially when he stays with us, they sleep with him. Mm. They go nuts when they see him. Mm-hmm. And it's, man.
So you watch the dogs because he's busy?
No, they're ours.
I see.
Never getting those.
I thought you said they were his dogs.
Well, they were. And we, with all his struggles, we just took them over.
Sure.
And, but, when he comes to the house and the girls see him, they go crazy. So, I appreciate, this platform, because it's tough. Not all stories end like this.
Yeah.
Somebody that's been coming to Al-Anon for years, son committed suicide, and he still comes back because his message can help people who may have that situation in their household. So, Al-Anon, check it out. It's, you just Google it. They meet basically every day of the week.
How do you spell it?
AL-ANON, Al-Anon. And my gosh, if a kid's listening, teenagers listening, a teen, AL-A-TEEN. Boy, the first couple of meetings are tough. A lot of crying, a lot of hugging.
Sure.
And I took and dropped Stacy off for the trip down to Tantera with her girls, and when she walked out of that car, they almost knocked her to the ground. They, just she's like a mother to them, and one of them is joining I think she's joining Alcoholics Anonymous because they have some open meetings, and Stacy is going to be her sponsor. So it's the first time Stacy's been a sponsor for someone. Just amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I am so grateful for you to come in. The thing I heard, there's so much there. I mean, I did whatever happened with me and my struggle is nothing close to what you went through. But the thing that kind of resonated with me, and you talked about you feeling it, Stacy feeling it, and maybe even some degree Sean feeling it, was just that sense of shame. Like just somehow you're overwhelmed with shame. And I know that the feeling of let me back up, the emotion of internalizing all of that is so destructive. And you don't know the power of community, and God promotes community. He actually encourages to be in community. And when you're in community and you have the ability to share with others and open up, then that's when you can get over the shame. And when you can get over the shame, that's the first step to being on the road to recovery or some sort of healing process. And so,
I want to interrupt you for
yeah, please.
I never felt shame. I mean, I felt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you felt shame.
Breaking disappointment.
I got you. I thought you were feeling like
Sean,
it was your fault.
Well,
and you're feeling shame from that.
In regards to that, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was horrible. But it's something that I've never not been open to talking about it, because I think if I talk about it, I can help someone. And today is such a great platform. And, in that regard, yes.
Yeah.
I
that's what I meant.
Shame and like, how could I be such a horrible father?
Yeah.
And,
but it wasn't fair to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Anybody who's going through all of that, they're so overcome with shame in whatever capacity it might be, that it prevents them from understanding that they're not being fair to themselves.
Sure.
They're absolutely
and so in a lot of ways, and I'm not a counselor and I don't understand this, and so I'm probably not going to vocalize this correctly, but Sean had an illness. And
I didn't know it.
Right. Well, and he didn't know how to deal with it because it's an illness, right? Sean, if you're listening to this, come around, dude.
Yeah.
We miss you. We'd love to see you. I'd love to give you a hug. This podcast is truly intended to be entertaining and offer conversation and stories with people who are all walks of life. But again, this podcast was inspired because of something that I went through, and it's not about creating a podcast that's going to make us rich one day. It's truly about it's more about the message than the money, and using people's testimony and stories to hopefully provide awareness or provide hope for somebody who's going through something that is bigger than them. And a lot of this is stuff that was bigger than us. And it was through the glory of God and the belief in him that we were able to overcome those things. And now I know that I have a new purpose for feeling the need to serve others. And the Lord blessed me and Jillian with the ability to gab from our years of being on the radio. And we have a little bit of a following from our time being on the radio. And so we get to use this as a platform to potentially use people's story and testimony like yours and our own to serve others. And we would not be able to do that without you having the vulnerability to come in here and Sean allowing that to happen. And so I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been enlightening. Such a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, you too.
Hope you know how much I respect you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
It's been a great experience.
We're going to make it worth your time a little bit. We got Brown Piercy Cattle Company, who's one of our sponsors. They're going to hook you up with a guest gift box. You're going to get 4 premium thick cut steaks, 4 of their famous steak burgers, 2 family size roasts, and 4 pounds of 93% lean ground beef, if that's all right. If you think you can handle all that.
Can I be on every week?
Hey, come on. Hey, you're welcome back anytime.
Thanks,
and I know
buddy.
there's so many other stories that we could have talked about and maybe we'll get to do it another time. Thank you again so much for coming in. Episode 37 with Bill Althaus. Jillian, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
I'm Ronnie Phillips. Until next time, this is the Papa Ron Podcast.
You've been listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now on the podcast platform. Follow the Papa Ron Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
And while you're there, like, comment, and share.
Until next time, thanks for listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. Papa Ron Podcast. Papa Ron Podcast.